just for not recording, just obviously it's pretty rapidly unfolding, so I'll give you the information we understand now, but it might be that in an hour or two we have better information and we'll try and feed that through as much as we can. So,
yeah, definitely.
but it is a little limited. So, so thank you. I'll commence. Obviously, at the moment, we send our thoughts and our prayers to the people of Tonga. Obviously, a very difficult situation at the moment, given the communications we understand in Tonga have been pretty significantly impacted. Our assessment of the situation is still rapidly unfolding, and we're getting as much information as we can from our post. There is some satellite capacity in order to get updates, but the situation still remains quite fluid, and our assessment of the situation on the ground is still unfolding as we speak. So Prime Minister Morrison did speak to Prime Minister Ardern today. Earlier today, Prime Minister Ardern called Prime Minister Morrison, and they had a good conversation just about how important it is that Australia and New Zealand coordinate very closely in any responses, and that's what we anticipate, and that's what we intend to do. I can announce that that the Tongan government has agreed to an offer of assistance from the Australian government of a P8 surveillance flight, which we hope will be able to deploy tomorrow morning with a view to being above Tongan airspace around 9 AM Tongan time tomorrow. But this is subject to weather conditions and most particularly issues around the ash cloud. So there are no guarantees that that flight will be able to be taking off tomorrow morning, but if possible it would go very early tomorrow morning and with a view to around 9 AM being above Tonga. Obviously that is about gathering as much information as we possibly can. We understand the New Zealand government has offered a P3 Orion as well, so we'd be coordinating with the New Zealand government and making sure there isn't crossover and we're complementing the work that each of us are doing. We understand also a couple of Australian Guardian class patrol boats, or Australian provided Guardian class patrol boats, are doing some of that job on the ground in Tonga. That's led obviously by the Tongan government, but they are Australian provided Guardian class patrol boats. That assessment obviously will be very, very important to understand the extent of damage at the moment. From our reports from our post, I can confirm that all Australian officials and their families are accounted for and safe. We have no particular concerns about any Australians at this stage, but again, I put the caveat on it that it's subject to some communications difficulties. My understanding is that communications within Tonga are to some extent operating. It's the international communications through the cable that was affected that is causing some difficulties for us to get that information on the ground. I can also announce that we are preparing for humanitarian assistance through a C-130 flight that could be deployed from Brisbane. Pallets of humanitarian relief supplies out of our Brisbane warehouse are on their way to Amberley. That should be ready to go tomorrow. Again, that's subject to those flight conditions and the ability to get on the ground. That has not been officially accepted, that offer. Those discussions haven't taken place yet formally with the Tongan government, but we anticipate that we would make that offer of assistance, and should it be accepted, subject to the ability to be able to fly, we would get those supplies as quickly as we can. Those supplies are mainly around shelter, so the ability, I think, for around 100 families of 5 to be able to have supplies that would enable them, things like tarpaulins, water, cooking equipment, the sort of things, if people have been displaced, that they would be able to get that kind of support on the ground as quickly as possible. The final point I'd make before we go to questions is obviously Tonga has had very strict border controls for a significant period of time due to COVID, and obviously any assistance that is able to be delivered would have to take account of those very, very strict border controls, so obviously discussions would take place. We have obviously been working on a lot of procedures in the last couple of years as to how to deliver humanitarian assistance, taking account of the desire to not have contact between people coming from Australia, for instance, into other countries. So obviously that will be done in a COVID-safe way, and that was certainly discussed between Prime Minister Ardern and Prime Minister Morrison. So the final point I would make is we also are working with NGOs on the ground. I understand the Tongan Crisis Cabinet has met, and I think as we speak they would be speaking with donors about what kind of assistance might be needed. So we should have a better assessment in the next couple of hours of additional assistance that might be sought, but there are some pre-positioned resources that we have with Tongan Red Cross, which may be able to be deployed. And I did say finally a couple of times, but I'd say one final one. I know that the Tongan community here in Australia, a very significant community, very valued community, would obviously have a lot of concerns at the moment and be looking to look at ways that they can support the effort. I would just say that the preference would be for cash donations to NGOs in order to be able to deliver assistance in the most efficient and effective way, but I'm happy to take questions.
Could you tell us what communications you have been able to establish? I understand the New Zealanders have only been able to contact through their High Commission. Is that the same for Australia? Has that been the only route of communication we've had? Yeah,
that's been the case to date. So it's through, there has been discussions between DFAT and our High Commissioner there on the ground. I should have said earlier that the DFAT staff are in there's a defence facility there, and that is considered the safest place to be at the moment, just in the short term. Obviously there's a bit of volatility in terms of what the weather conditions and what's going to happen with tsunami warnings and the like, so that's considered the safest. The comms to our HOM remain, and so there is the ability, but they're not necessarily there in the HOM at any given time at the moment.
Do you have any information on the state of the airport? Are you confident you could land a Hercules or a Globemaster at the moment, or is that something the reconnaissance flight would have to determine?
At this stage, I don't have any particular information on that, so obviously that an assessment will take place.
Do you yet know what the New Zealand surveillance craft can do and the Australian one can do? Will they be limited by the same conditions in the air? I know that that there are different planes have different levels they can fly at depending on what level the ash gets to. Will both of the surveillance flights be subject to the same conditions?
I think pretty similar conditions. Yeah, obviously the P3 Orion is has similar capacity to the P8. It's just a slightly older craft. So in terms of, I think it affects things like range and the like, but I wouldn't profess a great level of expertise on that particular level of detail. But I think they'll be similarly constrained.
Obviously water is going to be one of the critical supplies that are likely to be needed given the inundation and the ash that's been falling, at least on Nuku'alofa as far as we know. What is going to be the best way we can provide water? Is that going to be through the naval boats or from other countries that are closer, or will it be airlifted in? What's the plans in place?
Well, I think we're looking at all contingencies on that, but obviously there are a number of countries. Obviously there are other countries in the region who have been affected, but I think it's pretty clear that nowhere to the same extent as has been the case in Tonga. So obviously we'll look to partner with other countries in the region. They are obviously always keen to support their Pacific family in whatever way they can. I mentioned the pre-positioned assets with the Tongan Red Cross, and obviously we'll look at naval vessels as well as Air Force assets as required. The other point I would make is obviously we've made an initial offers of assistance, but this is in the absence of detailed levels of information and detailed requests. The Australian government stands ready to do much more as the situation unfolds, as we understand the situation better, and we'll be making those offers through officials and through the High Commission in the coming days.
One of the things that Australia often does that is most valuable is sending AUSMAT teams, but we know the AUSMAT teams have also been working in Australia during the COVID crisis. Do they currently have the capacity to be deployed again overseas?
That's generally there would be, but in terms of that specific, that's something I'll have to come back to you on.
I can keep going. Do we have any provision to provide desalination facilities if more fresh water is needed in a medium to longer term in Tonga?
The water purification is part of some of that those humanitarian kits. So that basic ability to have safe drinking water is part of those kits. So obviously that is important potentially. We just don't at this stage know how much the water supply may or may not have been affected. All right. All right. Well, thank you for coming out, guys. We appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if there are any other updates, that
Yeah,
come
we'll
through
we'll
later in the
absolutely,
day,
and so through Cass and Sarah, and yeah, we're anticipating the next hour or two and might have some more information, so we'll certainly feed that through as soon as we do it to yourself and all the other